Hello, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday. That means it's time to practice, practice, practice. Hopefully, some of you have gotten in the habit now of Friday evenings, getting in a nice practice session before the extended sessions on Saturday and Sunday. But at any rate, I think it doesn't hurt to start a weekend off with a good dose of inspiration, some thought-provoking material to think about during your practice sessions. And that's the purpose of these interviews. And I need to also mention that this Cello Chat is also sponsored by Tamarack Arts, which is a wonderful program that, among other things, its main focus is on adult learners, which definitely do not learn the same necessarily in all cases as other age groups. So check them out. They're at tamarackarts.org. With me this week is Dr. Miranda Wilson. Dr. Wilson, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Benjamin. How about you?
I'm doing well too. It's always great to talk to you. Now, can you give the listeners who may not be as familiar with you and your background some information on how you got started on the cello and where you got your schooling and where you are now?
Yeah, well, as you can hear from the accent, I'm from New Zealand, Wellington, the capital, which is a wonderful centre for the arts. And my parents are both professional musicians, so there was an expectation that I would be one too. I actually began as a violinist. A lot of us are recovering violinists, I think. And I started violin and piano age 4, but I didn't terribly like violin. So when the opportunity arose to play the cello when I was 9, I absolutely jumped at the chance. So I've barely put it down since. It became a bit of an obsession. And I went to school first in New Zealand. I went to the University of Canterbury, which at that time had two remarkable cello teachers who had come from the Soviet Union. I think they had defected from the oppressive political system there. Alexander Ivashkin, well, he's passed away now, an absolutely marvelous cellist and teacher, and his wife, Natalia Pavlitskaya, who's now living in Britain. She was my main teacher. She gave me 2 or 3 lessons a week, and they were very intensive. When I was in my last year of college, Alexander Ivashkin and Natalia Pavlitskaya actually got jobs in Britain. So I was able to follow them over there to do a master's degree at Goldsmiths College, which is the college of the University of London. And I ended up staying for 3 years, just taking in the amazing music scene in London. And then I thought it's time for an adventure and also a doctorate. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. So I ended up going to the University of Texas to study with Phyllis Young, who I know was also your teacher. I went because I read her remarkable book, The String. I thought, here is somebody who knows it. So, well, as you know, she is pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, among other things, among the things that I find very impressive about you, there are a lot of prolific music teachers out there, but I think your level of output is beyond prolific. So, for example, all of your articles for Strings Magazine or on other online avenues and your books, I want to make 2 questions out of this. First of all, how do you do it? What's your source of inspiration for ideas to write about? And then can you also give the viewers, the listeners, some idea of the content of these writings?
Well, you know me, I'm a talker. I have a lot to say. I'd always read Strings Magazine. I used to check it out at the Wellington Public Library in Wellington, New Zealand when I was like 12 or 13. And I would take it home and I would lie on my stomach on my bed reading these amazing magazines and thinking, oh, wow, this is just incredible. So it's inspired me my whole life, really. It took me a long time to pluck up the courage to pitch some ideas for articles for them. I've always written just because I love it. I even love writing emails. I just didn't have anything to write about for a while. And then when it occurred to me that I could combine my love of cello and my love of writing, well, after that, I had a lot to write about. So about 10 years ago, I wrote to the editor of Strings with some ideas for articles, and to my astonishment, the editor at that time wrote back and said, "Oh, yes, please, and here are 4 more that you could do for us." So since then, I've written a lot for them. I felt inspired by this experience to also start writing a blog at my website, mirandawilsoncellist.com, because I always have so many ideas and I just want to write them down. And once I sit down at the computer, they sort of tend to flow out of my fingertips. I have another website, Cello Practice, cello-performance.com, where I write more specifically about cello technique. So I really enjoy that. But my goal had always been to write a book about playing the cello. So I wrote Cello Practice, Cello Performance. It was published about 6 years ago because I wanted to write a book about all the aspects of playing the cello that I had been quite bad at. And I wanted to present them in a way that made it seem that it is possible to play the cello well. Because I don't know about you, but I often had the idea as a young student that being talented or gifted or really good or a top player, it were sort of these mysterious gifts that might or might not be bestowed upon you. And if you didn't have them, well, then bad luck. And now I know that it's complete nonsense. As Phyllis Young said, all skills are learned skills. None of us comes out of the womb able to do any of this stuff. We can learn to do anything. And I wanted to put that across in my first book. I wanted to teach people that what you do in practice will ultimately be reflected in what happens in performance. And making mistakes or having a bad time of it are not inevitable. And we can all improve with a few handy practice strategies.
Terrific. Now, I'm sure that your enthusiasm and your approach in and of themselves are contagious to your own students. But supposing you have a student that is just kind of feels like they're spinning their wheels a bit, or just is kind of having one of those days, what's in your go-to toolbox of ways to fire them up as you are always fired up?
That is a great question. Well, as you know, we've been through some stuff recently, right? And depression and anxiety among our college students, well, it's a thing, isn't it? And some of them have been having a really hard time. And when all your performance opportunities have been taken away from you, and you no longer have the excitement of a concert to look forward to, what do? I think that is when the cultivation of good habits really comes into it. Because as you know, it's quite easy to get your practice done on a day when you're feeling extremely inspired. The cello basically plays itself. You're like, oh, I could sit here for hours playing my scales, completely absorbed in what. Yeah, too bad about the other 164 days and you don't feel like that. So for me, that's where just having a habit comes into it. If you know that you're going to sit down at the same time every day, or not even necessarily at the same time every day, but definitely every day to do your practice. If you know that you're going to do it just the same as you're going to brush your teeth even when you don't feel like it, and you're going to feed yourself breakfast even when you don't feel like it, or something like that. If you have that habit, that can compensate for a lot. And I don't know about you, but sometimes in the middle of a very boring and uninspiring practice session, I'll suddenly get a good idea about how to fix a technical problem I'm having, or how to shape a phrase, or how to analyze a certain section harmonically. And then that little spark of inspiration comes out, and suddenly I'm ready to go again. I'm quite often draggy and reluctant about practice. I think once you sit down and do it, it can get a whole lot better than you thought it would be.
That's true. And uh, feeling like after an hour's worth of practice that you are a noticeable amount better at whatever you've been practicing is definitely motivation to sit down the next time. And so along those lines, a couple of directions I'd like to go with that. One of them is you, rather than digging in your heels or fighting online lessons during these past 15 months or so, you seem to have embraced them. What either changes did you have to make to keep those as successful as possible, or what did you learn from adapting to that format?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think, unlike the majority of teachers, I was already doing Zoom lessons. I had done them for several years, actually, because people occasionally call me from other parts of the country or the other side of the world sometimes, and they say, look, I've read your book. Would you consider teaching me? The first time somebody asked me that, I thought, oh, all right. And I wasn't sure how it would work. And as you know, you got to adjust a few sound settings on Zoom to optimize it for playing, because it's rather different than it is for just talking. So I was already very comfortable with it. And my husband was nice, and he got me some equipment that was very useful, such as a camera that would enable people to see pretty much all of me from the top of the scroll until the bottom of the body of the instrument. I thought it maybe wasn't that important for people to see my input, and just a nice microphone and so on. However, I don't think you have to have those things, and I think you can use Zoom quite successfully even with very modest amount of technology. So when the pandemic hit, I thought, oh, okay, it was an easy pivot, but I did see colleagues and friends panicking, really panicking, that they had never done this before, and they were about to, they thought, lose their livelihoods. And I thought, oh, nobody would ever have a Zoom lesson, and they'll say they won't pay as much for the lessons or something like that. And I thought, okay, well, let's take a step back. And so I was able to counsel my many friends who have private studios. I said, look, your qualifications and expertise have not changed. Therefore, it is not reasonable for people to expect your hourly rate to change. Now, Zoom lessons can be just as good as in-person lessons in the hands of a skilled practitioner. So the first thing I think we all had to learn how to do was to get the setup to work out. You can actually get a surprisingly good setup, picture and sound quality from an Android. Some tablets like iPads and Android tablets, I want to see at least down until the point at which I want to see your contact point, because as you know, certain naughty little so-and-sos like to blow up on the fingerboard, and we don't want them to. Do each other, and you have to be able to hear each other. Now, we all learned about have you turned on originals? Have you minimized your background noise or not minimized your background noise depending on the situation? We all learned how to do that. Most of us upgraded our technology and all the rest of it. But when it comes to the teaching itself, once you've sorted out how it looks and how it sounds, I think you can do very well. The main thing you cannot do in a Zoom lesson is you can't sort of walk around the room observing the student from all angles the way that we would normally do. I've seen you teach, so I know that you like to look at it from different angles too. So I think it's very important to have a position in which you can turn around and show the student what it looks like from the side or from the back, and that the student can also do that. So yeah, we're playing a bit of musical chairs, but that can be made to work. There was among some colleagues a certain amount of complaining about not being able to physically touch the student. And for a lot of people who rely on pedagogical touch, that would have been a struggle. Personally, I actually really never touch a student in a lesson. Phyllis Young herself was the person who said, you need to learn to teach in a way that you don't go grabbing people's hands. And she said, I don't want there to be any suspicion of impropriety. And at the time I thought, oh, this elderly lady in her late 70s, like nobody would think that she was doing anything improper. But, but she was right, though. She'd been in universities for a lot of years, and she knew that bodily autonomy is important, consent is important. All my teachers, apart from her, would just grab my hand and like push my finger on the string whenever they felt like it. They never asked my permission. I mean, I didn't mind, but some people probably don't like that. So yeah, but I learned from Mrs. X, she said that you can describe everything in kinesthetic terms in such a way that you don't need to grab the student. They can figure it out themselves. She was such a gift, wasn't she? So I think you can teach very successfully on Zoom. Now, I know that some people get a little tired of the eye strain from all the screens and so on, but I have found you these glasses with these are blue light glasses, and it completely took away my eye strains. Highly recommended for people who spend a lot of time on screens.
Cool. All right. Now, let's see. Mentioning Mrs. Young, it was interesting, among other things, being around her, how it seemed like cello never left her brain, and she would just relate everything in day-to-day life to cello playing. You've recently taken up running, for example. Do you find yourself, when you're with that skill or any other skill, also making parallels to just kind of like skill training in general, skill building in general?
That's a really interesting way of putting it. Yes, I did recently start running. I am not at all sporty or athletic. I've never played a sport. And I'd always thought that I was bad at sports and couldn't run, just could not run. And I don't know exactly what provoked me to do this, but I decided I was going to do this program, which you can get in an app called Couch to 5K. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always greatly preferred the couch. I thought once I started thinking about this, I had to, once I get an obsession, I can't stop thinking about it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And part of it was that I wanted to set a good example for my daughter, because she had started saying that she hated PE at school. And I thought, oh, good grief, she got that from me. Because I was that child. I cut PE class so many times in high school, they stopped trying to make me go. So they said they had to go to the library and do extra Latin, which I think was meant to be a punishment, but I thought it was a great idea. But I decided I was going to do this thing, and I was really quite nervous about it because I didn't want anybody to see me running, because I thought they would think that I was uncoordinated and foolish. And I thought I would be all red in the face and sweating, and I just thought that I couldn't do it. But then I thought, this is precisely why I need to do something, because it can be quite humbling to be bad at something. And people like you and me, we don't like to be bad at things because we spend our entire day telling young people how to do stuff better and how to improve. And so it's humbling. So the first day I did, and you only have to, you alternate walking and running, and you only have to run for 60 seconds on the first day before you're allowed to walk again. So the first day actually wasn't that bad. I thought, okay, I can do it. Am I enjoying it? I am not. I can do it. But then they make it harder. And then the first time I had to run for 90 seconds without stopping, like I felt like I couldn't do that. And so I said to myself, all right, I'm allowed to quit. The rules are I'm allowed to quit if I don't like it. I can quit at any time. And then somehow my stubbornness kicked in and I didn't want to. But at first, really, I would get very out of breath after just 1.5 minutes of running. When I had to run for 3 minutes without stopping, to me, it seemed like a marathon. And then somehow I managed to do it, and I was slow, and I was so slow, I was practically going backwards. So bad. And I started, I wouldn't say exactly enjoying it, but enjoying that I had done it. It's one of those things that you're glad you have done, like pulling up weeds in your garden. Did I enjoy it in the moment? I didn't, but I enjoyed that it was done. And then I got to the point in my last running session, I had to run for 20 minutes without stopping. And at the beginning of this, I would never have imagined that I could run for 20 minutes. But I actually did. Was it fast? No. But I started kind of feeling like I was a person that was running. So I experienced many feelings while I was doing this. you know, some childhood things about being the last picked for team sports. And it wasn't just the last picked. The other kids would argue over who got to not have me on their team. I was that bad. And, you know, it was miserable. And so I was working through that. I was just working through all my feelings about exercise and being bad at things. And I hate being bad at things. And my reluctance to do anything that might seem difficult. But then I started thinking about all the cello students that I had taught. And when, you know, as soon as you have an undergraduate who maybe isn't quite as advanced as you'd like them to be coming into college, and they feel so small and lost for a while, and they think, oh, I can't do this thing, or they are willing to accept a low ceiling for themselves. Now, from my point of view, I think that anybody can learn to play the cello. And in some respects, it's just a matter of physical logic, understanding how things work, your own body, taking music to pieces, figuring out what makes it go. You're a theory nerd, so you'll be on board with this, I'm sure. And empowering them to think that they really can do things. And it's really difficult for some college students who maybe don't have a huge music background. Sometimes they feel that they don't belong. And I think a feeling of community and belonging is really important to us. What has left us during the pandemic, of course, has been the feeling of community, because we couldn't do all the things that we usually do, such as orchestra rehearsals and concerts and that kind of thing. So where do you get your feeling of belonging? All I could say from my experience of running is that just keeping going to the running track and trying not to feel self-conscious that other people might be looking at me made me feel as if I belonged there a great deal more. But it made me think about how younger and less experienced musicians might not feel they belonged in the concert hall. And, you know, you're up on the stage doing something that you want to do very well, these little eyes looking at you. And it's very easy to sort of go inwards into yourself and sort of look down and pretend the audience aren't there. And, oh, what would happen if you looked at the audience? They might look back. Oh, but guess what? They're already looking. They can already see you. So you might as well look at them. But yeah, it's definitely been a journey.
Excellent, excellent. I love several things in there that, you know, when you mentioned Phyllis Young repeatedly saying these skills are learned, we learn these things. And the word talent, for example, is still so pervasive referring to music, even if when people they may mean, okay, I realize you've worked hard to get where you are, but still the word that comes out of their mouth is talent. And that getting youngsters to realize that understanding what physically you have to do to play the cello, and then some of that obstinacy, that determination to roll up your sleeves and keep going. It's amazing what they can accomplish, and it's so great to see them be amazed at what they've accomplished, isn't it?
It is. You know, it can be a long journey from the first day of freshman year until your senior recital. And I love celebrating that moment with the student and their family and all their friends, just this capstone achievement. It's so heartwarming. It was rough during the pandemic when we couldn't have live recitals here. We would have the student and me alone in the hall with masks on. Oh, the recording engineer would be there too. Just 3 people in the hall, and the student would play for the camera, and then we would broadcast it later. And I felt so bad that they couldn't have their families there. And because, you know, a reception where their parents put on a little party and like everybody's there celebrating. And I just felt so bad for our graduating seniors had to miss out on that. But yeah, as you say, yeah, it's wonderful to see somebody making an achievement that they thought hadn't been possible. And I would really hope that a lot of music students could come around to the way of thinking where they could imagine that this was possible. They could imagine a future in which they play the cello really well. I think you have to love it. You have to love it.
Yeah.
Because if you feel half-hearted about it, or you could take it or leave it, I don't think you're going to have the commitment to the hours in the practice room. You've got to love it, and you've just got to have a daily habit with many repetitions. Repetitions of the right things. Don't repeat the wrong ones.
True. All right. Now, I've been anxious to hear. I'm looking forward to this particular question. Miranda, please tell about not your upcoming future project, but plural projects. What are you working on right now?
Well, that's a really exciting question. I have not yet written as many books as you have, but I'm working on it. So later this year in October, I've got a book coming out with a small independent publisher called Fairhaven Press, and it is called The Well-Tempered Cello, Life with Bach's Cello Suites.
Nice.
Now, I really wanted to write a book about the lifelong experience of living with Bach and how your interpretations grow and evolve and how you grow and evolve too. There are several wonderful books about the history and analysis of the Bach suites already, so I didn't want to replicate the things that have already been done so well by people like Alan Weinhold, for example, is a wonderful book on the analysis of Bach suites. So it's kind of a memoir because when I first got to my job at the University of Idaho, I had this idea that I would really like to do a marathon concert of the Bach suites. I had never done anything like that before. In fact, I really hadn't played the Sixth Suite very much at all. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the sort of trajectory of the Bach suites kind of is a little bit like our life's journey, because, you know, everybody starts with the first suite, right? And in childhood, I started playing, I think the minuets were the first thing I played from the first suite when I was 9 years old. Now, I couldn't play them. I couldn't make head or tail of them, and I knew it. But I did know they were this remarkable music that I could aspire to. So I learned the first two suites in childhood, the third and fourth kind of in late adolescence. And the fifth I learned for a competition when I was a student. The sixth, I had played it in practice, but I had never actually performed it. And as you know, it's written for a 5-string cello, and that was something that was always in my mind, like, yes, you can play it on a 4-string cello, it's really hard. So I decided that this was a goal, and as I've said, once I get an obsessive goal in my head, I can't stop doing it. So it took several years to do this, because I do other things as well. You know, when you're a junior professor, you're out on the recruitment trail, you're teaching your head off, you're playing a lot, you're trying to establish yourself in the region. I wanted to write my book, Cello Practice, Cello Performance. I wanted to make a CD. There were a lot of projects sort of on the go simultaneously. So I gave myself 10 years, but I actually made it in 8. And I did my Bach marathon. And so this book is the story of the journey, and it flits back and forth in time between when I learned these pieces the first time at different stages of my life and how I'm relearning them now. And I also sort of go back into the historical aspects of them, and the details of the manuscripts, the instruments of the time, what various commentators have had to say about them. Bach, of course, didn't write any memoirs or any explanations of his work, but some of his contemporaries did. And I found it very interesting to go into the work of Johann Mattheson, and because I'm wildly over-imaginative person, I always imagine that I knew these people personally and could converse with them. I know this makes me sound a little crazy.
That makes me feel artistic.
So I go back and forth chronologically and non-chronologically through the suites, and so it's partly a memoir and partly about the Bach suites. I don't think my life is actually terribly interesting. The thing that makes it interesting is the cello, so it's mostly about the cello. Anyway, it was both easy and difficult to write this book. I think because we have 6 suites, which individually fall into 6 movements, that gives us a sort of built-in 36-part structure. So there's 36 chapters.
All right.
Yeah, and it goes back and forth. And I'm actually quite dreading my friends reading it because, I put it all out there. Anyway, so that's coming out in October. But I have a couple of other things that I'm working on too. One is a co-authored book with two colleagues from other universities on historically informed approaches to string pedagogy. Now, as you know, the field of historically informed performance practice is a long established and very well-known field. And we felt that the same could not be said of approaches to teaching. And we thought it would be incredibly interesting to look at the last 300 or so years of books about teaching people how to play violin, viola, cello, and double bass. It's very different between all the string instruments because, as you know, double bass is sort of its own non-standard thing. There's a huge amount for violin, huge, absolutely huge. A lot less specifically for viola, but there's absolutely masses of treatises for the cello. And most of us know about the one by Jean-Louis Duport. But also there's other amazing books. Dotzauer, who we all know is that guy who wrote all the hard etudes. Sebastian Lee and Bernhard Romberg, who we know is the friend of Beethoven who turned down a Beethoven concerto, for which we will disapprove of him forever. I went through every one of these books and I realized that a lot of materials have actually never appeared in English, such as the wonderful book on technique by Karl Davidoff, which is, you can read it in German. So I got my schoolgirl German skills in on that one. I translated the entire book. It took weeks. Going right into the 20th century through to the 21st, I learned so much about historical approaches to technique, historical approaches maybe to repertoire, to phrasing, to and so much about the evolution of cello technique from this as well. Because as you know, cello used to be played without an in-pin. Then people started putting one on and hey presto, suddenly women could play the cello. Because previously they couldn't because they were wearing these sort of voluminous skirts and the cello would have fallen right out, or they would have to play it in some peculiar side saddle position. And it's really interesting what happened when people figured out that once you had an in-pin, you could actually make it longer and then you could change the position and angle at which you would hold the cello. And once they figured that out, cello technique changed a lot. Also things like the bow hold, people used to hold it beyond the frog close to the balance point, and at some point this gets pulled back to the frog so that we sort of have more control, I suppose. And when you get into the pedagogy of today, of course, the people writing books about cello now have all had to play using a whole lot of extended techniques. They've had to play post-diatonic, non-diatonic scales and so on. And so you have pedagogues who are preparing us for those things. So it's an incredibly interesting history. And I think this will spread into more than one book because we're already exceeding our word limit. So that's book number 3. Book number 4, which I've just started, I was approached by a series editor to write a book about the core cello repertoire. It was to be a series of essays in the form of extended program notes, really. And I had often felt, both as a performer and a teacher, that there wasn't really a go-to resource that you could call upon when you had to write program notes. That's something that causes a lot of anxiety to college students who might be doing their first recital ever. And suddenly, oh, help, I've got to write something about this piece. So the idea is to do some light analysis. I wouldn't say this is a really in-depth thing, but some light analysis and some historical background to the piece. I was asked to choose about 35 pieces from the core repertoire. They said core repertoire. As you know, we've got a lot more than that. And it was really hard. I had to pick just one piece by each composer. How do you pick one Beethoven sonata? It's like, who's your favorite child? You know? But it was important to me, as well as having those pieces that we know so well, like the Dvorak concerto and the Elgar concerto and so on. It was important to have some pieces by living composers as well, and especially American composers. So I thought that would be just really fun. And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, who gets to decide what is core repertoire anyway? And especially being informed by the book on the historically informed approaches to string pedagogy, I had realized from reading the work of somebody like William Edward Whitehouse, a student of Alfredo Piatti, the things that he thought were core repertoire, pieces that almost nobody plays these days. And those were the core repertoire in the early 20th century. Yeah? Who decides on this stuff? Who gets to choose? And I thought that just takes away all my anxiety about choosing works of living composers. I'm just going to choose things that I think are really cool and would be playable by a good undergraduate, that was the brief. And well, time will tell, right?
Excellent. Wow, that is truly exciting. You're always up to so much, and I think just even hearing that sort of fire for going further, sometimes I think it's easy with this instrument that's hundreds of years old in design. Sometimes, and now a piece of music is set in front of us that's by a great composer. It's this masterpiece, and it can kind of feel like this museum piece and bring out the perfectionist in students, as opposed to, hey, this is where we are right now in our understanding of cello pedagogy, et cetera, where are we going next? And what might the student end up contributing someday to advancing cello repertoire, cello technique? It's an ongoing process.
It's so interesting what you say about thinking of this repertoire as this hallowed kind of sacred thing. I think one thing that writing my book about Bach has taught me is it really made me think of Bach and Anna Magdalena Bach as sort of human beings. A huge influence was Anna Bilsma's book, Bach, the Fencing Master, and the follow-up book, Bach and the Happy Few. And the way that he goes through Anna Magdalena Bach's manuscript, just note by note, really thinking about it. I was so inspired by this person who clearly lived with this music for a really long time and tried to take what is on the page seriously. Now, some people have accused Mr. Bilsma of going to extremes with this, and yeah, it probably is kind of extreme, but I think there are worse things than to take something very seriously. So I don't usually use an edition when I play Bach. I love going to the 4 18th century manuscripts, and you might be familiar with that new Baronreiter edition where there's a synoptic thing where it's got the 4 manuscripts and the first printed edition just side by side, so you can see what everybody's got to say about it. And then you really can sort of make your own decisions. And as you know, those 4 copies are so different from each other because they might have come from different sources, or they might have come from a revised original source, or we don't even really know. There are various theories about what happened to the original manuscript or manuscripts. However, it gives us so many ideas for what we might do on the second repeat, for example. And the more I lived with these manuscripts, the more I thought, there's so many ways of doing things. And last time I counted, there were more than 200 recordings available of the Bach suites. And all of them have something remarkable to say. Yeah. And they're all so different, but there's so much wonderful stuff that you can do. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to approach this great music, because Bach wrote music for people, not for the museum.
Right. Amen. I love that. I love that thought. Well, Dr. Wilson, thanks so much for your time. It's always a joy talking with you.
And you, thank you so much.
All right. And viewers, next week, we'll meet Eric Schmidt, current student at UW-Whitewater, and we'll work our way more through some of the frequently asked questions that we get through the website. So that'll be 5 o'clock next Friday. And in the meantime, happy practicing.